So one might say I've come a long way from that first and only, may I say, day in Sunday school years ago. I loathed it. And I was, as I recall, in a classroom with chairs, much like school. It felt too much like school. I thought this was Sunday. We didn't have to go to school. But here I was in a desk, and there was a teacher and some obedient students around me, and I was probably the teacher's worst nightmare, someone who didn't want to be there and who felt that I was being, against my will, asked to believe certain things and to behave in certain ways, and I wanted none of it. I remember looking out a window at a beautiful, beautiful Sunday morning with large fields that were beautifully mowed, and it just called to me. I just wanted to go through the window and run. Not away necessarily, but run just fast. I loved to run as a kid. I wanted to just get on that and just run and feel all of me, actually, not just the part that these folks were trying to zero in on and saying, we've got to get him thinking the right things and behaving in the right ways, but there was a deeper part in me that was not being addressed. I couldn't have told you then, but I know it now, that there was a part of me that just was not being engaged, and I was furious about it. And I remember just putting my head down on my desk out of civil disobedience and grabbing my coat and turning it upside down over my head. And suddenly my coat went whoosh, and I had no idea that there was an adult supervisor behind me who ripped my coat off, and I was shamed, and I sat there, and I never went back. So this past week, Carol Godfrey, who's the diocesan consultant for Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, had a chat session with me and a few of our parishioners here, Beth and Jenna, to talk about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And I'd done a little reading, and I was learning how this might be an alternative to what I endured and ran from, and what most, I think, people think is Sunday school education at most churches. So Catechesis of the Good Shepherd knows enough to want a child not to be taught and fed information and told to sit still and behave as a form of Sunday school. Instead, and I won't go into the whole thing, one large piece of it is not, they don't even say it's a classroom. And they don't call it a teacher. They call it an atrium. It's a sacred space. And there are no chairs, and there are no aisles and desks. And we don't call it a class. It's called a session. And so all of this is a way of acknowledging that the child who is in that classroom brings more to that experience than, sadly, has been assumed for all these years. Carol said this to me, and it sticks with me. She said, I mostly enjoy being sure to bring children into this setting, this atrium, when they're still maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, maybe 6 years old. Because if you provide them this lovely space that's sort of sacred and ceremonial and safe, and you give them at their level enough things to explore and to wonder about, you watch them fall in love. You watch them fall in love with this presence that permeates the room, which is personified in Jesus the Good Shepherd, who is the Son of God. And so if I were a child of 3 or 6, and that's what my catechist, not my teacher, was trying to show me, and knew that within me there's a capacity to bring wonder and love and passion and soul to this exploration, knowing that I might just fall in love, is altogether different from, she went on to say, I enjoy those 3 to 6 year olds because they will fall in love, and to witness that. And it establishes a relationship. I've talked for years about cultivating a sense of the transcendent, and here are 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who are doing just that. She witnesses this. They fall in love with a presence. It's real. And she says, when they get to be 7, 8, or 9, that's when they begin to judge the world. And that's when being the good student is about knowing what's bad and what's good, and what's right and what's wrong. And she says if we can get them early enough, they won't go down that path. Because going down that path is your path and my path, sadly, mostly, right? That we think that being a Christian means possibly behaving in a certain way or believing certain things. And if you believe enough of those right things, you can say, I'm a Christian. And if you behave according to the way Christians should, less and less of that these days, but still, there are certain things that you should be doing if you're a Christian. If you are doing those things, then you are a Christian. And if you're not doing those things, you're in a position to say, ha, I'm good, you're bad. I'm in, you're out. And for Carol, that's not Christian education, nor is it for me. So there's a third option, not being a Christian by right belief, not being a Christian by right behavior, but being a Christian by right relationship, which is exactly what she witnesses in these 3, 4, 5-year-olds, that given enough ingredients in this lovely setting that stirs what's already there, a kind of innate desire to be curious, to move outward, to engage, and to be in relationship, it really comes together quite beautifully. Jesus looks back over his shoulder. He's hearing this argument going on behind him, these disciples. And finally, when he gets a moment, he said, hey, back there along the way, what were you guys arguing about? Probably knowing exactly what they were arguing about. And, well, he does, right? They don't admit it. They go silent. But he knows that they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest. And that's our world, right? That if you aren't finding yourself in relationship with people around you, and certainly with divinity, which in a way is a relationship that then gives you this peace and this joy and this incredible, fulfilling sense of satisfaction. If you don't have that, and you feel like, well, here I am by myself, the only way I'm going to feel like I am somebody is to be better than you and to be greater than that person. And so here are the disciples who have no sense at this point that it's possible to be in relationship with divinity. They like Jesus, they like what he's saying, they like what they're awed by what he's doing, but they still quite haven't gotten it. They're still of a mind that the best we can do here as human beings is be great, and ideally greater than the next person. And how joyless is that? And how judgmental. And it doesn't go to the soul. You can be great and never fall in love. You can be the greatest and never have your full humanity, your heart, your mind, your soul activated and brought to life. And in that, there is this joy. And so he says here, you who are arguing about who's the greatest, if you think that's what I'm about and as good as it gets, let me just pull before you this child. I imagine the child to be maybe 4. And even today, a child of 4 has nothing to give you if you're seeking to be the greatest. No cash value, no social status, nothing, a waste of time when I could be off, generating friendships that could benefit me. He wants me to welcome this 4-year-old into my life. Because he says if you do, you're going to notice, if you stop and give your undivided attention, maybe even expose your heart a little and get down to that child's level, you'll see that child reflects back to you a relationship. That child still has wonder, still has a desire for curiosity and exploration, is still living in an enchanted world where that child knows, without consciously being aware of it, consciously, but feels, I'm safe, I'm surrounded by love, and I can just play all day and not worry about anything else. That this child is a kind of window and a representation of how it is that we all enter this world with this capacity to have a relationship with God, with this spirit that is all around us that as adults we don't even know if it's there or not, because we're so busy trying to be greater than the next guy or gal. Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is altogether a new thing for me. And it's promising. And it says that a child has within them soul, and within them a capacity, think of this, at 4 years old, a capacity to know love, and to know truth, and to be in relationship. And if you know truth, you also know falsehood. And if you know love, you also know hatred. And when you see someone in front of you who's not being treated well, and you've fallen in love with that person because they're the person you play with and you care about them, then you're willing to take on a little suffering to stand up for my friend. That kind of formation of children then becomes really something as adults we're reminded of. And reminded that there was a time, we think back, when all of life was enchanted, when everything was alive, and there was a relationship with all living things. And I don't want to paint some romantic picture, but it's true that that is always available. You can always stop long enough and risk your heart, mind, soul, and all your strength and move into a relationship that awakens the whole of who you are. And children have that capacity. Mahatma Gandhi, right? Who doesn't have respect for a man who was humble and wise and courageous? And he had these words to say, which just coincidentally, as I finished the conversation with Carol Godfrey, this came up as part of the commentary that we look at as a Bible study every week. Suzanne Guthrie, she finds wonderful, wonderful quotes. This from Mahatma Gandhi, which really, when you hear it, describes the approach Catechesis of the Good Shepherd takes, and the one that is a perspective and a view that we should all adopt, may I say. Here it goes. Mahatma Gandhi says, "It is beyond dispute that a child, even before it begins to write the alphabet and gather worldly knowledge, should know and does know what the soul is, what truth is, what love is, and what forces are hidden in the soul. It should be the essence of true education that every child learns this, and in the struggle of life be able more readily to overcome hatred by love, falsehood by truth, and violence by taking suffering on itself." I just find that remarkable, that a 4-year-old, it begins then, a 4-year-old, by falling in love with the world around them, with the presence of God in their midst, as probably the most true thing in their life, knows that this thing within me that is resonating with truth, my soul, will not be dissuaded, that the love I have for this one will guide me, will give me courage, and will allow me to even take on suffering if I see a friend of mine being hurt. I would never want to go back to that classroom and torture that teacher, nor be told that I can't be a Christian unless I believe certain things, or if I behave a certain way, neither which speak to my soul, neither which call me to life. But to have a curriculum that we might just take on here at Ascension Church, by which we encourage that in our children, and they in turn encourage it in us. Amen.